A good strategy is essentially a game plan. What does this brand need to communicate about itself? How will this brand be positioned? Which essentially means, how will it indicate it measures up against other similar brands offering similar products or services? So using the questions we've answered in the previous lesson as a starting point, ask yourself, are there any missing messages? Has anything here not been covered? Are there brand messages that are going to help this brand accomplish its goals? For example, if you notice that a brand, let's say it's a tailor, wants to be the most expensive, most high-end tailor in town, but your brand messages contain no indication of it being a premium service, well then it's time to add those messages. Similarly, do the brand messages reflect the USP, the unique selling point? For example, let's say you're working on a brand for a bakery and its USP is that it's a vegan bakery, the only vegan bakery in the area. Now, what a crime it would be if that wasn't conveyed somehow in its brand messages. So to help you understand how this works, let's go through a few examples of turning a client's goals into brand messages. So our first example, let's say you're branding for a graphic designer and they wish to indicate that no job is too small for them. They're more than happy to work with local businesses and to do bits and pieces. So how might that goal translate into a brand message? Well, you could use messages such as the fact they're approachable or local. Another example, let's say you're working on a brand for a photographer. Now, this photographer wants to score higher end commissions and to get recommended by top event planners and perhaps prestigious hotels. So which brand messages might you use to help the photographer reach that goal? Well, perhaps you could suggest they indicate reliability and professionalism. So I hope those examples are useful to you and help you to get the idea. So our next task is to identify these brand messages in no particular order for now. And you'll see my example here. This is the list I've put together for my cafe. So you want to put your own list together for your brand. Don't worry, because we're going to refine it later on. But for now, just add as many as you can think of that are relevant to your brand. So next, we take a look at the positioning of a brand. Now, this may repeat brand messages or it may run along very similar lines, but positioning tends to be a little more relative and specific. So I'll begin by sharing my example, which I've created for the cafe, the Totteridge Bakehouse. And I've included just 2 items here under positioning. And usually this would tie in to the brand messages. So they want to be positioned and perceived as the high-end cafe in the area, which is Totteridge. They also want to position themselves among other cafes as a venue that's appropriate for business meetings or people working from laptops. So the section underneath, the expectation we want this positioning to create is where we just clarify and usually explain this to a client. So positioned in that way, clients would be prepared to pay a premium. They would expect likely a very high quality, maybe an artisan quality of coffee and food. They'd expect there to be impressive interior design and a nice ambience to the cafe. And because we're trying to position it as appropriate for business meetings, they'd expect there to be a reasonable noise level and a mature atmosphere in the cafe. So you may notice that the second section, client expectations, are actually up to our client to deliver with their brand. But our job is simply to create the correct expectation in the first place. So while it's unlikely that the logo alone would be able to clearly convey all of this in terms of positioning, we can at least try to ensure it aligns well with the positioning and messaging. And that's why we're considering it in this stage, in this class. So when you're ready, in your copy of a workbook, in the top box for positioning, enter something you would like your brand to indicate to a client, and then in the second box, enter the intended expectation this will create for the client. And this is, of course, the area that the brand itself will need to follow through on. So good news, we're almost ready to begin designing now. There is just one more little task we need to do first, which we'll cover in the next lesson. We need to take a step back, have a look at the overall strategy, and then, quite importantly, organize the collection of brand messages into an order, a hierarchy, so that we've already established which is more important than the other, which is really going to help us in future stages. So when you're ready, join me in the next lesson and we'll look through this together.